2020, where I will be giving a crash course again on quick mapping. That's right, it's a workshop on how to map to your needs. And before we begin, I'd like to say, please remember to smash that donate button at the bottom there. This is all in aid of Doctors Without Borders, who are doing a lot of heavy lifting all over the world right now with the pandemic. So anything that you have to spare, if you have something to spare, please donate. Also, please remember to hit up that virtual vendors hall. It is full of people who are have amazing skills, who are looking to get their goods into your hands. They can't come out to regular cons, so please give them the support that they need to keep on being awesome. So today we are talking about mapping to your needs. I've got my extremely high tech system here to show off the maps and information that I've gathered up to work as examples. I am monitoring the stream chat, so if you have any questions, comments, queries, or anything else like that, throw them up as we're going along, and I will answer them as best I can. So, the very first thing about maps that you need to know, that everybody needs to know, is that all maps are lying. Every single one of them. Um, it it's really just a question of what are they lying about and how badly are they lying about it. Whether it's space, whether it's time, um, dimensions, details, every map is lying about something. Now, the next thing you need that is good to recognize and good to remember when you're doing any sort of mapping work is that maps are not standardized. Like, there is no universal map. Like, this is a map. Um, Different groups, different peoples, different cultures, different professions, everything all come up with their own different standards of maps that meet their individual needs. Now, some maps that we're most familiar with are like topographic maps. These are maps that show, the landscape. They've got little contour lines, rivers, roads, all that sort of good stuff. Anybody who's got a smartphone, odds are you're familiar with Google Maps and road maps and all that sort of stuff for routes from going from point A to point B. And of course, heat maps. You may not have heard of them, referred to that before, but whenever you see a map that's got a bunch of blobs on it showing the density of something or how many of something has occurred in an area, that is a heat map. So we use those all the time for showing things like, I don't know, how many cars of a certain type are in one place or how many lightning strikes have occurred in areas across the country. That's usually a pretty popular one. So these are the ones we're just sort of most familiar with, but this is just a fraction of what maps can be, and what maps have been in the past. So, where do we go from here, and how does it all work? Well, mapping to your needs. It's the name of this workshop. It's on the little card beside me here. And what I mean by that is that when you're mapping, map to the needs of your game and your table. Okay? You don't have to flawlessly reproduce a giant topographical map of your entire world of an entire world if that's not the kind of game that you're playing. Likewise, like if you're playing a science fiction game and you're just sort of hopping from planet to planet, maybe you don't need the granular detail of a neighborhood um, map. Maybe you just need a little dot on the map that says that there's a town there. You're going to drop there, do something, and get out. So always map to your needs. And when you map to your needs, you're going to find that you're going to be a lot more relaxed and have a lot more of achieve a lot more immersion because what you're presenting is going to be what your players need to do what they're doing, as opposed to giving them something they don't need or giving them too much information. And the final point before I jump into some examples of maps and talk about them and what they do is world mapping. Now, world mapping, this is very contentious because there are several schools of thought about this. Some simply like to present one area that's extremely detailed and sort of leave the left rest as you know fluff for you, blank spaces for you to fill in. Others like to create an entire world, throw labels all over it, and then sort of detail it as you go out. My opinion on it is that if you're creating an entire world, if that entire world is involved with what you're doing, at least map out the shapes. Okay, you don't have to put all the details on. You don't have to include, exhaustive, like name all the countries or nations or tribal areas, whatnot. You don't have to have all that. You just have to have the general shape. That way, if your players do decide to go there, at least you have something to work with right off the hop. You don't have to scramble and try to figure out what's there. But that's just me. So I'm going to come over here and change up to our first example map. So this map was made by Occidental Avian. It is a map of Exandria, and it is from the Critical Role fandom page. This is a fantastic map, and it's got a lot going on that is worth talking about. First and foremost, this is an excellent example of what people think of when they think about a fantasy map or a world map. You've got a couple of continents. Everything's labeled, Tal'Dorei Republic, Clovis Concord, Kryn Dynasty, all that good stuff. They've included a scale bar just up here in the center. I'm not sure if my mouse shows on there, but there's a scale bar there, so you can tell how far apart things are. Um, and they've, instead of using like contour lines and things like that, they've used graphical representations of mountains, forests, plains, swamps, all that sort of thing. Um, and of course, they've got this beautiful compass rose here, and yeah, and then a little box at the bottom stating that the geography is by West Haverland. The maps for Made in Reference were created by Devin Rue and Andy Law, and then the ownership information for it. And this is a fantastic map, and but this only fulfills the needs of some very specific types of gaming. For example, are you using this entire map? Um, what is the level of detail that your players need? Like, are you playing a game where you're moving from broad area to broad area, or are you playing a game where you're focused more on the dividing plains here in the Tal'Dorei Republic? So maybe you need to focus in on that area and that lake a bit more. Um, so this is, something else that's here. This is something to me. There's no legend on this map, and you're going to notice that in a lot of maps is that no legends are included. And that's because it's assumed that you know what everything on this map is. That you can identify the roads, rivers, lakes, all that sort of stuff through familiarity with them. Um, this is a great example of sort of a standard fantasy map, and is a this is from the second edition of Dungeons and Dragons. This is from the Forgotten Realms Atlas, and this is showing the northern hemisphere of Toril. So you actually see all of Faerun, you see Karatur, you can see where it goes down towards Al Qadim at the bottom there. You see the Chalton Peninsula arcing out along the bottom. And this is a great segue into world shape. Now, world shaping, you don't have to necessarily make your world an oblate spheroid. I talked about this yesterday. Um, when you, we're sort of conditioned because through science, regular media exposure, all that sort of stuff, that when you think of a world is round. Okay? It's a sphere. And if you want to get technical, it's an oblate spheroid because it's not actually a perfect sphere. It's kind of dented and bumpy. That's a different thing, though. So we think of it that way, and we think, okay, I have to create a world. I have to make it onto a sphere, and this isn't true. You don't have to make it into a sphere unless you're playing games that are based in more strongly in reality. So, for example, if you're playing a more reality-based science fiction game, contemporary games, that sort of thing, there's no need to make the world a sphere. You can make it any shape you want. It could be a cube, it could be a disc, it could be just some islands floating in the ether, all sorts of stuff like that. And I've got a comment here. It's wild how different maps can look when they are technically show the same thing. Yeah, absolutely. Every like topographical maps are fantastic for showing things the same information in a variety of different ways. And this map's got the same thing going on. The other map did. in that they're using graphical representations for forests, mountains, um, plains, all that sort of stuff, and assumes that you can identify rivers and all that sort of thing, although it has labeled all the seas quite nicely. However, unlike the other one, because this was part of a larger Atlas book, it's already shown a legend, a compass rose, and all that sort of stuff earlier. So it's just assuming that you know that. It's kind of interesting. Now, let's have some fun. So this map is by a person named Angelica Alzona, and she made this map of the Final Fantasy III world um, for Kotaku for an article they made. I love this world. This is a great fantasy world. It's floating in the sky. It is complete. You've got some oceans, you've got a bunch of locations to go to, all that sort of good stuff. But it is also simple and to the point. Now, there's some stuff on here that may automatically rub some people the wrong way. For example, where's the Arctic? Well, there doesn't need to be an Arctic. There doesn't need to be a jungle area. There doesn't need to be a even a north or south, because this world was created without the need for those things. It's literally a like an ocean or sea filled island floating in the sky. So this is a great way of like starting to move outside of the box. This is a completely self-contained world, and this is a great example of something I'm going to be getting into very quickly here, and that's building a map around what your game needs. The game only needed this. The game didn't need an Arctic area. The game didn't need a whole ton more mountains than are presented here. The world didn't need to have a bunch of other stuff. It just needed this to happen. And that is it's saying it's fantastic a lot. For a campaign, this is ideal. Like this is a campaign complete all in itself, and then you're ready to move on to the next game or next campaign. All right, this is familiar. Anybody who's played, spent some time on Super Nintendo. So these are from. This is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. This is the Light World, or at least mostly Light World. Looks like there's a little superimposing happening at the top there to get the. Oh, my mouse does show. Perfect. To get everything going on. But this is again, great example. This is a campaign. You have all of your areas, you have different terrains, everything else like that. And I'm just going to talk about this one and the Dark World in a moment for a bit, because I just want to talk about what this map is lying about, because I talked about that earlier. So things this map is lying about. The first thing it's lying about is distance. We have no idea what the actual distances are between these areas. We have a large village right over here, which is like the village area is larger than the castle area. However, when you enter into the castle is dramatically larger than it shows on the map as being. So this map is lying about time and space right off the hop. The next thing it's lying about is it's lying about how the all these different biomes are interacting with each other. Because I mean, you have these mountains up here, then you have a desert area here. So you've got a lake district down here. You have impenetrable forests, which are shown by all these trees. So this isn't generally how biomes and topography all work together. And so this is something else the map's lying about. It's also lying about the depth of the rivers, shapes and everything else like that, because in the style the map has been drawn, everything is very angular and pixelated, and that was owing to the limitations of the hardware that it was created on. So this map is lying about a ton of stuff, but it doesn't make it a bad map, because within the context of your game, you may not need to know the distance between two locations, right? Unless you're playing a game where that's important, where you need to know this amount of space between places. That's superfluous. You don't need to. You don't need to know it unless you're playing games that's specifically using that mechanic. Um, we also know like there's no random encounters in this game either. So why have all that extra space between places if you know that you're going to be in the village and then you're going to move to here and then up there or up to the castle and you're going to have an encounter in this area right here? That's perfect. You don't need to know this space. Um, Likewise, you just need to know, okay, the last place that we can go before the desert is this little manor house area here. Then we're going to come down. We're going to encounter some stuff in the forest area on the path, and then we're into the desert adventure. This is all great, and it works fantastically. It's one of my favorite maps. And what makes this fun is because this moving into the world building element, you've got the dark side. So this is a double-sided map for all intents and purposes because you have the light world and the dark world. Now, let's see, to come in here, a map that works like a critical homunculus is a pretty neat concept. Exactly. Um, so this is a double-sided world. They've looked at it and said, okay, well, we want to have two worlds. We want to have a light world and a dark world where our world is not a sphere. Like this is the entire world as it exists. Like Hyrule is a nation in of itself, as a nation and world, at least in this game. So they simply flip the map. So on one side, you've got the light side. You start out here, the characters go through all their adventures, discover that they need to travel to the other world, and bang, now you're in the other world. It's a not quite mirror image of the world that you left. The desert is now a green area. The Lake District has a fortress and less lake. Pardon me. The village is a ruin, is kind of ruined and beat up. There's a giant pyramid where the thing is. So this is also a great example of recycling maps. So you don't have to necessarily create an entirely new map every single time that you go somewhere. You can recycle maps very easily, and by changing a few details as they have here, looking at this world versus the light world, you keep interest, you keep suspense, you keep all the things you're looking for in your game, but you're saving a little bit of time. Um, so comment here. I love this map. I saw it on Twitter. Someone rebuild. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that map's awesome. That's fantastic. So these are great. And I'm just going to pause here to remind everybody to please donate to Doctors Without Borders. The link is below. The goal that we've set is $2,500. We are almost halfway there now at $1,030. So please donate if you can. As I said before, they're doing a ton of heavy lifting for everybody right now, and they rely entirely on donations to operate, so please donate to them. And absolutely hit up the virtual vendors hall. There's a lot of creatives out there who are struggling right now with all the cons being shut down or being put on to hiatus until the pandemic passes. They need your help so they can keep being awesome and keep being creative. So please hit that virtual vendors hall, pick up something cool, and let people know that you love their art and all that good stuff. All right, back on to maps. So we've looked at sort of traditional fantasy topographical maps. Two examples of those. We've looked at Final Fantasy III, this wonderful floating island where we don't have, or north, south, east, west don't have to exist, and neither does a lot of other things that we assume their world has to have. We've looked at the Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past maps, where they have a flipped world with all sorts of stuff going on. Let's look at this world. So I know there's a lot of Thundercats fans out there, and this was the official map released for Thundercats Third Earth. And this map is lying about a ton of things. It gives us a compass rose, which is nice, so we know what direction is north and all that sort of thing. However, it's also drawn in a almost like a three-quarters three-dimensional view. There is no distance. There are no distances involved here. There's no scale that we can tell, like for the size of things. And and it's just a ton of information. So you've got from the hunting plains to the cat's lairs. There's the Burble Village, an acid lake. How's that work? A great void. It's just a ghost in some fog. Home of the vortex. What's that? Um, the Onyx Pyramid of Amun Ra, volcano, home of the fire thrower. All that's Pass of the Barbarians. So this is a map style that is entirely acceptable for a ton of uses, especially in game. And like this is the sort of thing where if you this is I call this the gauntlet map, or the golden axe map, because it reminds me of those maps from those old games where like this pen would come out, draw a little dotted line leading you from the castle to like, I don't know, the fire swamp or the evil forest, and then all of a sudden you were just there. And that's the sort of map this is. It's lying about a lot of things, but on the other hand, it's also trying to give you the maximum amount of information about the world in a way that will try to get your attention and make it interesting to you. So there's a lot of things on here that are eye catching. There's a lot of names on here that are very evocative. And this is all good information. Like this presents terrible topographical information, terrible geospatial information, fantastic gaming information. Okay. You don't have to have a giant topographical map to make your world interesting. This is an interesting world, and all you need for it is, sort of like to make this work is what they've done, where they have lots of really cool art. So the graphic, really interesting graphics. They've got evocative names. They have presented you with a vague north to south, east to west axis. You've got Castle Plundars, a threat at the bottom. Invading Berserkers are a threat to the north. And go. I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to pass over the Bridge of Slime into the Pit of the Nether Witch, or have to go anywhere near the River of Despair. That just sounds grim, but it's good to see here. That's a concert. That's so 80s. Yeah, it is very 80s looking. Um, I love these kinds of maps. Planescape has a bunch, but yeah, these maps are also very, great point there with Planescape. Maps like this are fantastic if you're working in areas that don't necessarily obey the normal sort of laws of physics or reality, more so than regular fantasy or science fiction maps do. So places where the physics are different, or places where things aren't the same as sort of we understand them. This is a really really good style to work with, because it gives you a lot of options with how you can present your information. So now we're going to come up. We're going to leave Third Earth here, um, because we're on the topic of how to present information, which is the biggest thing a map does. We're going to go to this. This is one of my favorite maps in the whole world. This is the T and O map. This is an image that I got off Wikipedia. This was literally the map of the world for a lot of people for a while. Um, and as you can see, it's not necessarily wrong per se. So the first thing you'll may notice is that Asia is to the north of the map. Well, that's because that isn't north, that's east. And the idea that north has to be the top of a map is actually a fairly um, new thing. Like it was only in the 19th century that we actually started to standardize with having north at the top of a map. Prior to that, maps, especially European ones, tended to either put Jerusalem as the middle of the world and sort of radiate out from there, or they would be directional maps. So if you were, say, traveling east for trade purposes, east would be at the top of your map because that was the direction of travel. So that's sort of what's happening here. So you've got Asia, you've got Europe, you've got Africa, um, then you've got the ocean all around that. And if I remember correctly, because I cannot read Latin, if I remember correctly, this is the Mediterranean, and I believe, oh, what river was it? It was the Danube or something. It was one of the major rivers in Europe. Was the was what uh brought the, or sorry, so yeah, there's the or was it the Volga? But anyway, so yeah, you've got here's the Mediterranean. Here's a big river that they felt cut Europe off from Asia, and here's Africa. You know, Oriens, Occidens, Myrdes. Yeah, so this is an example um, of what people sort of thought the world looked like for a while. Coming here, it's not lying, just omitting some stuff. Yeah, it's omitting quite a few things. Places, the rest of the planet. Yeah, but however, it is a map still. Um, if you were to follow this, if you were to head east from Europa, you would hit Asia. If you were to head, well, not quite east perfectly, but same thing if you head there from Africa. Oh, Mediterranean end. Okay, nice. Thank you for that. So yeah, that is the Mediterranean end there. So yeah, that is a map. It's functional. It works. You could totally drop something like this on your players if you wanted to. Oh, so you're coming here. Other versions seem to call it the Nile. Yeah, there's a few versions of this map um, with different things labeled on it. But the one thing that remains stable through all of them though is you've got Asia here, Europa, and Africa, and of course it's a T and an O. Um, this map cracks me up. I love it. But again, as I said, this is a map, but maps can get even more different. So this is I think I got this off Wikipedia there as well. This was what the London Underground looked like in 1908. So this was your route map for navigating the London Underground. And what makes this interesting is that this is what I would refer to as a transitional map. And this is see here, comment here. Medieval depictions staying true to their theme of being ridiculously hilarious. Absolutely, yes. Um, yes. Um, sorry, back onto this one. So mapping to your mapping to your needs on this map. So this is what I call a transitional map. This map is fantastic for when you need to mix, to show an example of what happens when you're trying to mix information with topography. And so as you can see in the background here, they actually have the roads and laneways and so on of London. Now here's London Bridge here, Whitechapel, the Chalk Farm, Hampstead, line going out here, um, Turnham Green, all that sort of stuff. So what they've done here is they've tried to actually follow the actual routes of the London Underground, and at the same time match them up to the roads and areas above them. And so this leads us to this, and this is a current map of the London Underground, and it is absolutely a map. Um, it is lying about a metric ton of things. And one of the biggest things it's lying about is it's lying about space, it's lying about time, it's lying about location. I mean, yes, you will run into all of these places along this route, but they are no longer connected to the areas that are above ground. As you can see here, everything is set to scale. It looks almost as confusing as something else in Berlin. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, and this map doesn't even get into some of the more interesting parts of traveling on the tube. For example, there are points you'll get to where it is actually easier to hit one area, leave the tube, go back to the surface, and then come back down to it at a different point. And that is a more efficient way to travel. But this is a map, and for certain types of games or even certain cultures in your games, this might be perfect. um, it doesn't need to present all the information as being perfectly geospace or perfectly located geospatially. It doesn't care anymore about things like topography. It simply wants to let you know where things are along said routes. And in my mind, at least, if you have a lot of subterranean action happening in your games, this is probably the kind of map that they would develop, because why do they care about mountains? They care about the river that runs through the area, and then they just care about getting from point A to point B through a bunch of tunnels. So if you're running that sort of a game, um, this may be the sort of map that they use. And they may even use this kind of map to navigate to points on the surface, as this map is using it, as this map is used for. um, which would make it extra confusing for people from the surface who run into it, because they're coming at it and they're like, okay, well, this says that, Elm Park is here and Upminster is here. Well, that doesn't look too far. That could be hundreds of miles, tens of thousands of kilometers. You don't know, because they don't talk about the distances on this map. Um, but it's a good map. And the final map I'm going to show you guys, before I go back to simply talking about mapping to your needs, is this. I got this image from Wikipedia, and this is a stick map. This was used by the Marshall Islanders, the navigators that they had to navigate between islands. It's one of the most beautiful maps I've seen. I absolutely cannot read it, because map reading for them was a highly specialized skill that only a few people had. And these maps were incredibly accurate. They used a combination of currents, wave formations, animal sightings, and a bunch of other factors, stars, a bunch of things, to determine where islands were, and then mark where islands were, and then how to get to them, by using wind and current. And this is, again, a great example of what a map can be, and mapping to the specific needs of a group. So, um, yeah, it's love this map. Um, really cool, really interesting, and sort of shows the scope that you can go to, where you can go from that, so a map of, very conventional, very Western map of a world, which includes, which it does appear to be including some trade routes and all that sort of thing. And then you have a map like this, which is functionally doing the same thing. It's telling you where islands are and how to get to them, and navigation to and from. It just doesn't have the uh, the other information that we are more accustomed to seeing. So I'm just going to come to settle on this map here and talk a little bit on this map and another one about mapping specifically to the needs of your game. So can I zoom in here? Nice. All right, so we're going to zoom in on Wild Mount here. So this is the new area that just came out. So this map was beautifully done. I believe it was done on OneDraft, which is a mapping program I'll talk about at the end when I talk about resources that are available to you to help you make maps for your games. Pardon me. So this is, I'm quite zoomed in right now. If I zoom in anymore, yeah, we start to get pixelation. So this is the maximum that it's meant to be viewed at. And this is a fantastic map, in a lot of ways, and meets a lot of needs for a conventional game of Dungeons and Dragons. So here's your scale bar. So 0 to 400 miles in nice, neat increments. So what does this map do? What needs is this meeting? Okay, well, first off, this is meeting your visual needs. It is telling your players and the DM what the world looks like. It is telling you what everything is named. It is giving you an idea of the sorts of terrain that are around. Okay, so you've got a marsh right here. You've got forests. It looks like sorry, grassland there. Um, you've got there's a marsh right there. You've got mountains, little villages, all sorts of stuff all scattered around. Next need this is fulfilling is this is fulfilling the need for random encounters and downtime between adventuring locations. So if you are traveling from Port Zune to Nicodranus to Tostenwald to finally end up at Zadash, okay, so look up at the scale bar there. Yep, that's pretty far. That's a pretty long journey. So you're looking at a journey of over 400 miles to get there. So that is we're talking time. So say you can go 10 miles a day. So that's a 40-day trip, not including time taken to heal up from any encounters that happen or things that you do in like Nicodranus or Trostenwald, on your way, or Affield, I guess you got to pass through there too. Um, so this is fulfilling a lot of needs for a specific game, and specific style of game, and that is sort of the conventional Dungeons and Dragons experience, where you are traveling from point A to point B, having random encounters, maybe an adventure, then moving on to point C, with again random encounters, maybe an adventure there. And of course, it's giving options. Maybe while you're in Nicodranus, something is happening down in the Quaras Quaraska jungle. That's a name. Um, maybe something's happening down there, and they ask you to go down and investigate. Maybe the Cyrene Green Forest has something going on in Tossenwald, or maybe somebody's dropped something in the lake. They need you to recover it, so you're diving in Lake Vitalock. The point is that this is giving a lot of options to the DM. So this is an extremely good sandbox style map. This map can cater to both a structured campaign, or it can work with a less structured, more sandbox approach. Okay. This map, at the scale that it's presented at, this map is entirely, it's coming in a mouthful and a half. Yeah, it really is. That was a very difficult word to pronounce. This map is entirely sandbox at the scale that it's being presented. This is like very, very broad. I'm traveling from, the Rauran Dust Desert to Tulung. Good luck. I would even go so far to say that this isn't even actually a great sandbox map, but this is a great overview map. Or this is the sort of map where, in a science fiction game, you'd be rolling up on a planet and you would show this to your players and say, "Hey, this is the world. Where do you want to land?" And they look at it and say, "Okay, well, we're gonna land in Tabit," and call it a day. So this one doesn't fulfill as many needs, but if you shift the type of game that you're playing, or the style of game, it meets some of them. Okay, and the points for this one are the same as for the one for as this one. It's very similar for this one. So I think I will go with Final Fantasy 3 or Zelda. And people should never make sort of choices live on air, man. I'll talk. There's points on each. They each do a little bit better. Okay, so we'll start with the Final Fantasy map. So what does this map provide? What needs is this map meeting? First off, it's meeting the needs for a campaign. It's meeting the needs for where you're going to be adventuring. So you've got the Village of the Ancients, you've got a Castle Kassoon, Netto Temple, Canaan, Gaishal, Toza, blah, 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 blah. You have all these places. This is not catering to distances. So this is very much an event-based map. So you're here, there's an event, and then in the time that it takes to go between these areas, which is sort of not specified, you may have a random encounter or two. Um, So this map is it's less of a sandbox, especially within the context of a like tabletop RPG. Because of course, in the video game it's from, yeah, this is totally a sandbox sort of area. Like you wander around, run into stuff, get into fights all the time, and it's perfectly normal and fine. But in a tabletop frame of thinking, what you're really looking at here is an event-based map. So you are moving from point to point. The main events are happening at specific locations, and those locations will have higher amount of detail in them than the actual world map itself. And that's where the Zelda maps really sort of excel, because they're saying, okay, this is an important area. It has been heavily developed, pardon me, and this is where things are going to be happening. This area is also important. It's where things are happening. This area is important. This is where things are happening. Um, so the needs that this is meeting is it's saying, okay, we are not concerned with space or time. I'm not as concerned with random encounters. I'm not concerned with a whole bunch of stuff. What I am concerned with is that the players need to move from point to point and event to event to move the story forwards. So this world is definitely, it's not a sandbox, just despite its box-like shape, and your ability to roam freely throughout it. Like there's only limited restrictions on where you can go on the map, as certain areas unlock in the game. But within, again, the TTRGB RG blah blah blah, then the TTRPG, there we go, context, this world um, is not a sandbox. This is an events driven campaign where the important thing is that the players move from point to point in the campaign to complete those areas or find the information or items or whatnot at them, and then move to the next one. Now they scattered. There's a few secret areas scattered through here, which is what sort of might refer to it as adding something extra to it, because there are areas you don't necessarily need to go to but are nice to go to, because there's extra things happening there. And when you add stuff like that into your map, especially if you're running a game like this, it is almost a guaranteed method to increase interest on the part of your players, because inevitably like players will lock on to things that interest them and all that sort of stuff. And if you give them those opportunities to sort of get away from the main story for a bit and do something extra, that is super handy. And which brings us back over here to our friend the Thundercats map. um, and this map is, believe it or not, a sandbox, but it is an events sandbox, because there is no overarching, well, there could be, but as presented, there's no overarching plot here. There's no links between places. For example, you don't start at Cat's Lair, go to the Plane of Fertility, hit the Garden of Delights, before going to the Great Void, the home of the Vortex, Bridge of Slime, Pit of the Nether Witch, Treasure Ruins, Desert of the Phosphorus Sands. That sounds horrifying. Pardon me, sorry. Um, Before going through the Field of Dagger Rocks, and finally battling Castle Plundar. Um, that's not what's here. uh, Instead, what this map is presenting, at least to me, is a collection of events that don't have to be done in order. There is no overarching plot behind, that your players are free to move from point to point on and try to take them on. Um, this map does not care about the time or space between these locations, because nothing is happening there. Um, like as you leave Cat's Lair to go to the Plane of Fertility, nothing happens. You just end up in the Plane of Fertility, I guess, I don't know, picking plants or something like that. But then all of a sudden you hit the Micket Swarm monster, and that's what's there, or the Living Ooze, or the Acid Lake or whatnot. And so now you're in those events dealing with those things. Um, and so from in terms of like mapping to your needs, Um, this is a great map if you're like, hey, I need a map for my players. I want to present them with a lot of stuff to do. I'm not huge into making a whole bunch of topography and trying to make a real world. I just want to present a lot of information to my players to see where they go with it. And that's what this is good for. And I'm just going to pause here for a moment to take a drink. And then please remind everybody, donate to Doctors Without Borders. There's the link below. What's it? We're almost halfway towards the goal of $2,500. And the Doctors Without Borders they're all volunteers. They rely on us donating to them to help them out, to help people in areas that have poor medical infrastructure or no medical infrastructure. And in times like this, where we have a global pandemic going on, it is more important than ever to lend support to them. And also, please visit our virtual vendors hall. There's all sorts of cool stuff there. And if you could go there, check it out, maybe pick something up, that'd be fantastic. It helps support all the creatives out there who are struggling right now. Well, not all of them. It helps the specific ones you buy stuff from uh, in these times of difficulty that we're all sort of facing. Not sort of. Well, we are all facing. Um, now, back onto this map. So yeah, this is a great map if you are running an events-based sandbox, where you just want the players to move from event to event. You've got some cool stuff written up. Like you've got a thing written up for the Living Ooze. The Swamp of Serpents has its own little thing all done up. Pardon me. Yeah, this is a great sandbox map. This map, the TO map, mapping to your needs. What are you mapping for this? Um, to be perfectly honest, like this is the sort of thing that at least I would use in game as a broad hint that there's more to the world. So, like, say your characters are, here or here, and they thought this was the whole world. That suddenly they find this thing, and it says there's more world around them. Um, hopefully it spurs them to go explore it and maybe define it a little bit better than simply having, a half circle and saying that's Asia. But like for most functional purposes in game, this is a tool to try to drop hints that there's something out there, or that like this is what's the word I'm looking for? This is an aid to gaming. This is a handout. This is something that you can create quickly, give out to your players, and then they figure out what's going on. Or try to figure out what's going on with it. So it's meeting a need of driving story forwards without actually giving away much about the world that you are working with or presenting in. Okay, so London Underground map. Okay, these two maps actually work hand in hand. These two styles. So um, with the older one here, the 1908 map, what does this map do? How does this help? This is good for when you are running in D&D terms, if you're running an Underdark campaign and you want to keep track of where the players are, or the players want to keep track of where they are in reference to the world above them for whatever reason. Um, so this is meeting topographical needs. So you've got your rivers and you've got major landmarks up on the surface, but it's also meeting your actual travel needs and your actual navigational needs underground. And of course, this one is like this the pure underground one, which I discussed before. And then this one is the stick map. So this actually brings me up to the end of my presentation. Perfect, with 10 minutes left to answer any questions that people have. And then I'm going to be talking briefly about the there we go. Talking briefly about different tools that are available to people. And I'll start doing that while people are coming up with their questions, if they have any. So tools that are available. There's actually quite a few handy tools that are available out to you now for mapping your needs. The days of having to write it all out in pencil or a pen and then photocopy it or scan it and send it to your friends. Well, they're not over. You can still totally do that if you want to. However, there are some electronic options available. The first one that comes to mind for me is and bear in mind, none of this is sponsored. None of these people are paying me. Um, there's Incarnate. Incarnate is a browser-based mapping program. They've recently made the jump out of beta into beta. I don't know. Anyways, they're on their 1.0. All sorts of cool updates, all sorts of cool things. It is free to use in standard definition form and for personal use. There is a annual license you can get that will it's relatively inexpensive. It's like $20 a year or something like that, and that will provide you with access to the HD quality images and let you use the maps for commercial purposes. The next one, for people who are a little bit old school in their map preferences, and I actually just realized I should have thrown one of those maps up. Hex mapping. Hey, hex mapping is how it got started back there. Oh, question here. What are important things to consider when making maps for different species cultures inside a game's world? Like making a different map that, say, people from the Sword Coast would be using versus one from the people of Chult. Oh, that is a solid question. So the first thing I would say is people tend to map what they find to be culturally important. Um, so objects and things that they find that are of importance to them are the things that are going to end up on the maps. Um, so there would be a difference, I think. I think if Portnai and Zaru, for example, and Chult, their maps would probably be very similar to those you'd find on the Sword Coast because they've been very much they've absorbed many aspects of Sword Coast culture. So they'd be looking for things like trade routes, major towns and cities, things like that. People in the interior may be more curious about the actual topography of places because that's what they're more concerned about, like from the perspective of Chult. But broadly speaking, yeah, it's whatever the culture feels is important is what's going to go on the maps. A good real life example of that is a lot of the medieval maps that put Jerusalem as the center of the world. That was culturally important to Europeans at the time, and so that was their center of the world, and everything radiated out from it. Um, so yeah, that's an example. Another example would be those stick maps that I talked about, where the details of the islands were less important than the methods of getting to them. So that would reflect a culture that knows that once they get to an island, that the islands are probably going to there's probably going to be mountains, there's probably going to be coconuts, there's probably going to be water, all that sort of stuff. The challenge is getting to them. So um, yeah, like making a map. Let's see, set of games world. Yeah, groups that are more military would be producing maps with a far more accurate ground depictions than you may say find on the maps of merchants. Like a merchant map may have excellent distances listed between each location that they want to go to, as well as watering holes and places like that. A military map would have, say, potential areas for encampment, defensible areas. Distances would be important, but not as important as the ground around places where they felt they were likely to fight or where they planned to fight. So those are some examples of like different perspectives for shaping different maps. Does that answer your question, or is more detail? Okay, awesome. Yeah, that was a solid question. Uh, so back on to as I wait for the next question to flash up. The next to I was talking was Worldgrapher. Worldgrapher is an old school hex mapping program. I believe you have to purchase it, but in purchasing it, you get a license that lets you use it for just about anything. Yeah, it's a very cool system. Um, and fun to use. There's Wonder Draft, which we saw an example of maps made by that with the Exandria map that was part of this presentation and workshop. So that Wonder Draft you have to purchase, and once you purchase it, you get access to updates and everything else like that. It's licensed for commercial use as long as you're using the icon sets it comes with, or ones that are um, licensed for commercial use. Um, it's a pretty decent program in of itself. There's a company called NBoss that makes some pretty cool star mapping stuff. Just trying to think here, and there's a lot of great programs out there. Here, I'll give you, can actually give an example of Incarnate here. So just going to bring this over here. Open this map up and talk about briefly about a map that I'm working on. Let's see here. Okay, so this is a map I'm working on. This is my Patreon project this year. And so let me get onto us. There we go. Something safe. That's not going to change the map. So this is something I'm working on this year for my Patreon rewards. And this is a map of the Lost Lands of Majalo. It is, and we could just talk here for a moment. So we've got a couple minutes left about what needs this map is meeting. How am I doing? 4 minutes left. Okay. What needs this map is meeting? So, sorry. Wrong hole. All right, so this map has distance. Love a little scale bar here. So distance is important on this map. So space and time. Things this map is lying about. Well, obviously you don't know, like what's a major city. You don't really understand what these different icons here mean until you read the details, but you do know what they are. So you've got a small legend here. You've got title of the map. Actually, is mapping to your needs. I just realized this is a good opportunity to talk about components of a map that make life easier. So, finish off strong here. Hey, Mr. Prudence, what's going on? Finishing off strong here. What have we got here? Well, here we have a map key or a legend. This tells you what the different icons on the map are. This is only a partial legend. Okay, like many others, I'm assuming that when you look at certain things on my map, you know what they are. That you'll know that these are mountains. That's a jungle. This is a swampy area. All that sort of thing. Okay, so certain assumptions that are built into this map. However, I'm not assuming that you know what the icons mean. So each one of the icons has been labeled so you know what's going on. Okay, scale bar. Try to keep your numbers even in scale bars. Like some people put like, 0 to 13 and then have some hash marks between it or something like that. That tends to mess people up. Mine's simply going up by tens, so 0 to 100. Much easier to do quick math with, and to try to figure out fractions in the middle of. Tends to keep things a little bit easier. Map title, always important. Know what's going on. Little icon, let you know who made it. This is annotation. Okay? Annotation is important because this is telling you what's what, and the location of your annotation is very important because you want to have it be both legible and actually and be close to what it's describing. Okay, so like for example, if I had moved this, I could have. Oh, there we go. So like I could put that here, mess this map up, put that here, then oh, don't want to move that mountain. There we go. There we are. So I can put all that there, but now it confuses the image. You can't tell. Like you can probably guess that's the mountains and these are things, but it's all sort of up on top of each other. So let's undo all that. Okay, so you want to make sure that your annotation matches. Another thing is scale. try to make sure all of the things on your map are scaled more or less the same, or are clumped in scales that are the same. Um, Makes life a heck of a lot easier. So I've actually run into the end of my time now. I don't want to run over because coming up next is, oh, yeah, Lee, that's fine. Coming up next is automating TTRPG design. It's going to be a super cool presentation. I'm going to be watching because I'm very interested in this, because design is can be tedious, and anything that can make it easier is going to make life better overall. My name is Graham. You can find me at PSC Gamer on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all that sort of stuff. Thank you very much for watching my panel today, or my workshop today. Please remember to donate to Doctors Without Borders. Hit that link at some point. We're slowly working our way up towards the $2,500 goal, and hit that virtual vendors hole. You've been a fantastic audience. Thank you very much, and have a great day.